Welcome everyone to the TU Dublin Hothouse Learn and Lunch webinar series. We are delighted to welcome Conor Kenny, Regional Investment Advisor in Northern Europe at the US Embassy, and also Orna Madden, Managing Director, Ireland and UK at CliniShift. Orna will be discussing export journey to the US. Conor will present the SelectUSA initiative from the US Embassy and provide insight into expanding into the US. And Orna will discuss the CliniShift export journey. We have a competition today for all our registered attendees. TU Dublin Hothouse are the lead partner at DRIC, the Dublin Region Innovation Consortium. DRIC are a gold partner for the TU Dublin Tech Summit taking place on June 17th, where we'll be exhibiting and hosting a keynote panel. We are giving away 2 pairs of tickets for the event. In order to win, you must ask a question in the chat box today or post online via hashtag TU Dublin Innovation. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat box and we will cover them after the presentations. Just for housekeeping, please make sure your microphone is muted. So we will start first with Orna and a presentation. Over to you, Orna. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sabine, and just want to thank the TU Dublin Hothouse team for inviting me to speak today and just to impart some of the CliniShift experiences so far on our journey exporting to the US. So well done on organising today. So as I said, I hope all the attendees get some small guidance or insight as to what CliniShift experienced over the past 3 to 4 years. So just very, very briefly, I don't intend spending very much time talking about CliniShift. That's not what everyone came here to hear about, but just to add a little bit of context, I suppose, to our journey. When CliniShift was first set up and started out its journey, it was to effectively address the shortages of staff in the healthcare industry as a whole, and in particular how staff were being managed internally, specifically nurses and HCAs. And from that, our CEO, Amy Madden, developed the CliniShift software. It's developed here in Dublin, as I'll speak to a little bit more shortly, in the involvement of Hothouse and Enterprise Ireland, and how that has helped us on our journey. But Amy's main goal was to really, as a former hospital CEO, to try and streamline those processes around booking staff and organising their schedules. So what we have today is a communication platform that allows staff to share their availability, to pick up those additional overtime shifts, fill those gaps in rosters, so that managers aren't immediately going out to agency staff to try and fill those vacancies. But it also, I suppose, brought those manual paper-based processes and turned them into that sort of technology or that sort of software focused view that staff can be organised and reduce all those Excel spreadsheets, WhatsApp messages, which are quite inconvenient for frontline staff. So today, I think you could say that CliniShift, while it is a communication piece of software around managing staff, it has evolved out to address some more significant challenges in the US market. So you can tell from this that we're focused on the healthcare aspect. Obviously, some of the companies today may or may not be involved in that space, but hopefully our journey will help in some way to show how that roadmap is or that export market works for you. So really, I suppose I'm just going to touch upon a couple of high-level items around market research, what we did when we first started off, and just touch upon some supports, incorporation of our company over there, how Conor and his team in the US Embassy have helped out, particularly on areas where you mightn't think is particularly important, but on immigration and various other aspects that flow from that. But really just looking, I suppose, at, if you're starting out today, depending on what stage you are at yourselves as a company in Ireland, whether you're a startup or you're established in other markets, I suppose looking at the US, it is vast, we all know that, both geographically and population. So you're not going to boil the ocean when it comes to the US. And that's one thing we were very clear about. And we perhaps spread ourselves a little thin. We're still growing as a company and we are obviously very focused on the US, and I would say at some stage along the path it was Ireland, UK, US. But since achieving our first pilot over a year ago in Manhattan in a large health system there, we really leaned into the US market much more and have become much more focused on how we can really expand over there. So, you know, trying to I suppose, establish yourself here in Ireland, because that is an important factor as well to consider. The first question we're often asked when we present to a new health system is, well, what is your footprint in Ireland? How many hospitals are you working with? How many users have you got in your system? So they like to see you prove out your concept at home, which for us has been quite challenging equally, as the US market has been. So I think really looking at why you're going into the US is the first big question. You know, it is the holy grail for a lot of Irish companies looking to export. It's exciting, it's a bit of a roller coaster, but it also has lots of challenges around that. And that particularly, I suppose, boils down to finances as well. So a couple of things we probably could have done better would be not try and take on too much. Probably try and establish a team over there sooner, I suppose, just to really evaluate the market. However, we did have huge support from initially looking at market segmentation, business case, R&D around our product, making sure our MVP was where it needed to be. And that all came from the New Frontiers program, but also Enterprise Ireland. Then when we got past all of that and actually began to really explore our options in the US, we were, you know, exposed to a huge network within Enterprise Ireland US. So we worked through the Boston office there, which deals with their life sciences and healthcare portfolios. So Doreen McKeown and her team at that time, I'm not entirely sure if she's still there, but she had a huge network on the East Coast. And as I said before, geographically, you really have to look at where you want to be in the US. For us, it was having 2 to 3 big health systems between Boston and New York, and some down in Florida as well, who expressed an interest in what the problems we were trying to solve. And that all came out of getting Enterprise Ireland to reach out to their contacts, knowing who your stakeholders are as well, and really understanding the problem they're trying to solve with staffing. Does your solution, your product, your service address that? Because you might think it's wonderful, and I'm sure it probably is, but is it wonderful and going to solve everything for those customers in the US? So really establishing ourselves, started and getting on the plane and going over there, really having opened up those networks is key. You know, it's a question of, do you and your entire team move over there? Do you send over one member of staff? Do you how committed do you get, and how often really can you be there? Because the US tend not to look beyond their own borders. They are so big and so vast that, you know, it's quite daunting sometimes, as I said, but exciting. But I definitely think that there is a serious commitment to it. I mean, we're probably 70% of our resources now would be invested in the US as a company. So really, I suppose that initial sort of preparatory work around your market is key. We did make some hires in the beginning, one in particular that really did not work out well for us, and I tell that against ourselves, I suppose, but we were too early stage. So I would suggest, you know, really making sure that you've got your first 1 or 2 big clients secured before you start developing out that team. And really what we did then was, myself, Amy, and another member of our team, we were constantly just going over and back to the US, which can be quite, you know, challenging. It's tough. It's a tough exercise. It's a tough challenge, a tough thing to do. But as I said, if you're really kind of invested in the market and invested in your product and feel that there is a strong desire for it, I think it's definitely worth your while. So as I said, the first hire didn't go particularly well. It was expensive. I think she was siloed there on her own over in the US, with no real engagement here back in what we were doing in Dublin. And really from that, I suppose it was a good learning experience. And the one thing I would say is make sure you know what your plan is before you do that. You'll have to get into hiring recruiters. They're all very, very expensive, as you can imagine. Everything in the US is you know, it's not cheap. We've since had more success around some of 1 or 2 of our hires, so we've learned from that. So really, I suppose then some other key points then to be aware of are considering then, depending on your product or service as well, what are all the different state laws that might apply when you're looking at what state you might want to go into. For us so far, we've probably just even scratched the surface between the East Coast, between Manhattan, New York area, Boston, Florida, Chicago, and we've had a little bit of exposure to the St. Louis market, and that came out of a big event that was partially funded and supported by Enterprise Ireland. That was the Global STL Health Innovation Summit about 2 years ago, and we found that hugely beneficial to us because it brought up a whole new network of hospitals for us and contacts. We came very close to securing a pilot, but unfortunately then organizational issues rise. So, when it comes to getting from those initial sort of introductions and presenting to the market, it's how long then that sales pipeline is for you, and that has to be factored in. You need to look at your cash burn. So for us, as I said, we've had our first pilot going now for the last, I suppose, 10 months. It took us 3 years to get to that point, and we burned plenty of resources and cash and time. Hopefully it would be worthwhile in the next year or so, and we'll move on to the next site from there. And that is our launch pad, and that sort of plan and strategy is really important for any new startup going into the US market. But as I said, going to states like Florida and St. Louis and Chicago, and hearing what each one of those states, is that problem something that they're trying to solve there. So then I suppose really looking at the infrastructure, apart from just hires that we've made on how we actually approach the market, we did ultimately incorporate in the US. And I think that's an important, it can be a little bit daunting to think, am I going to have to start living there? Am I going to have to manage a US subsidiary company? I think the reality is there's probably some tax implications around that for Irish companies, which I won't get into, not my area of expertise, but, I would take advice on that. We've set up a Delaware company. We have CliniShift US incorporated over there, and really that is to give that impression of commitment to the market, to show that we are around for the long haul, and really, as I said, US in our customers, US healthcare systems don't look beyond their own borders, and really they have no interest in incorporating or contracting with an Irish entity. So I would advise looking seriously at the benefits to you as a company. Incorporating, it's not a very difficult process. You'll have incorporation services in Delaware who will do all of that for you. They'll help you maintain it and manage it on an annual basis. So it's certainly something, it might seem like a very small thing, but it's certainly something worth looking at as well. So I also want to just touch upon, I suppose, as well, I've already mentioned how Hothouse and Enterprise Ireland have been hugely beneficial to us. As I said, we went through that accelerator program with New Frontiers. We had exposure then and access to lots of mentors and lots of seminars, and really sort of nailing down our business case and what it is we were trying to achieve with our business. But on top of that then, as I said, Conor and his team provide some fantastic supports. I know that he's made some introductions for us through various different states. And also the seminars that the US Embassy have put on. And in particular, something that is very important to consider is if you or your team from Ireland are thinking of going and moving there for a couple of weeks, couple of months to try and establish your business, it's really getting in contact with Border Patrol or Homeland. I'm sure Conor will touch upon this, but I know I've been to a couple of events where we've had the benefit of speaking to that team or listening to that team. You don't want to be messing with those people down in Homeland and in Dublin Airport. They're quite scary, I think, from stories I've heard. Thankfully, we haven't had any incidents ourselves, but really understanding what you're allowed to do with your work permits, your visas, and making sure that you're in a comfortable position to make sure that you can actually be there and get all of that squared away. If you're very serious about the US market and you're going to look to move there, I think, not speaking for you, Conor, but I think you probably have a list of really good lawyers. There's 1 or 2 Irish lawyers based in the US who will give the necessary advice around that. Again, it all comes down to money and resources and investing your time. So you really have to be sure that you're committed to the US market, and really make sure that you know where you want to be within that. We haven't even contemplated the West Coast. As I said, the furthest we've been so far is, I suppose you could say, Chicago, St. Louis. It's just vast. So a very focused strategy and plan a marketing strategy around that is really, really important. So I think I have pretty much kind of very quickly, you know, if there's questions specific to each one of your own scenarios that I may or may not be able to help with, I'm happy to answer those after or in follow-up. But I hope it gives you some indication of the journey that is ahead of you if you're looking at you know, establishing yourself in the US. I highly recommend it if it's something that you're really keen to commit to. And you know, the journey so far for CliniShift has been extremely positive, but I think the supports we've had through Conor and his team, initially from Hothouse and also, you know, to Enterprise Ireland, have all been superb. And I think we really, as a small country, we're really impressive, I think, when it comes to exporting our people, our products, and our services. So we can be very grateful for all of that, I think.
That's great. Thank you so much, Orna, for your presentation, and especially, yes, the difficulties and challenges that one company may encounter. So we're going to hear from Conor Kenny, now the Regional Investment Advisor in Northern Europe at the US Embassy, and I'm sure Conor will give us some of those answers. Thank you very much, Conor, and over to you now. Thank you.
Excellent. So thanks a million for that. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks, Orna, too, for fantastic insight on CliniShift's journey in the United States so far. So yeah, as Sabine mentioned, my name is Conor Kenny, and I head up the inward investment arm of the US Embassy here in Ireland through an initiative called SelectUSA. And what SelectUSA is, it's the US federal level agency that's responsible for both promoting and supporting foreign direct investment into the United States. So easiest way to describe it to someone in Ireland, it's like the IDA equivalent, but for the US government. So a really interesting space to be in. You know, in Ireland, we always hear a lot about the US multinational footprint in the Irish market. These companies employ roughly about 180,000 people in Ireland. What we don't hear as much about is the story of Irish investment and Irish companies in the United States. But Irish companies actually, believe it or not, employ just over 110,000 people across all 50 US states. So given the population variance between both countries, we punch well above our weight. That was something that the US government recognized back in early 2017 when they set up the SelectUSA office at the embassy, which I head up to support Irish companies, such as everyone on this call, with regards to US investment aspirations. So I'd just like to take this chance this afternoon to talk a little bit about our services and how we can support the companies on this call. Before I do that, I just wanted to really quickly spend one slide talking about the advantages of locating in the United States. Now, I'm in a very fortunate position in Ireland, given that Irish companies are very familiar with the US market and the benefits of doing so. But I just wanted to highlight some key points with regards to why Irish companies are choosing to locate in the United States. The first point I wanted to make is that it's the #1 market in the world for foreign direct investment. Every year, a consultancy house called A.T. & Kearney does an FDI Investor Confidence Index report. The United States, for the last 9 years in a row, has been the #1 market for FDI. So it literally is the best market in the world for you to consider when you're looking to internationalize your business. The second thing I wanted to mention, and it's a huge driver for Irish companies going to the United States, is the access to approximately 320 million consumers. The scalability in the US is phenomenal. To put that into perspective, it's a similar population to Germany, the UK, France, Spain, and Italy combined. Also, if we look at individual states like California, Texas, and New York, if they were their own standalone countries, they would actually be 3 of the biggest 15 economies in the world. Phenomenal opportunity for a company to scale their business. It's got the largest air transportation system in the world, very easy to get around. The reason I want to mention this, though, is because, again, in Ireland, we're incredibly fortunate to have US Customs and Border Patrol at the airports in both Dublin and Shannon, which means that we have quite a wide variety of locations with direct flights from Dublin into the United States. Why is this important? Well, one of the big drivers for a company when they're looking at going into the US is they like to be a direct flight and maybe a 2-hour drive away from the location where they ultimately set up their US entity. And with US pre-clearance here, it opens up all sorts of doors and opportunities with more and more flights coming online every year. It's one of the most innovative economies in the world, really strong R&D ecosystem, strong IP laws, and by investing in the United States, you get access to the best universities in the world and some of the best talent in the world. a competitive export platform, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later on, where we're seeing more Irish companies actually landing into the United States and using the US as a base to export into maybe South America, other North American markets, Asia, Australia even. And that is, again, that's something that we can support a company with if that is what their aspirations are. A global hub for finance. Big reason a lot of Irish companies look at the United States in early stages, access to finance. We're seeing more and more of the finance houses in the United States having a prerequisite that an international company, in order to ascertain finance from them, needs to have a US presence, and therefore we're seeing more Irish companies going and locating in the market. One of the easiest places to do business in the world, and the final thing I'll say is there are very strong cultural links between Europe and the United States, and that's no more evident than in Ireland. In the last US census, about 10% of the US population actually claimed Irish heritage. I'd say around St. Patrick's Day, that number is probably about 95%. So that's why the US, well, some of the many reasons why the US is such an attractive market. Now to go on and talk a little bit about what I do and how SelectUSA, the embassy in the US Department of Commerce, can help a business like you. So everything I do and everything SelectUSA does falls in two broad categories. Firstly, and probably most importantly and interestingly to the companies on this call, is the work that we do with international companies themselves. And in this area, it's quite hard to define what it is that we do because every single company's got a different set of needs. But in essence, we're here to try to resolve any issue that you might have with regards to investing in the United States. And when we say investing, we mean actually setting up a physical location and hiring people on the ground in the US market. We deal with companies from all sectors and companies from all sizes. Obviously, there's some prevalent sectors being in Ireland, and obviously our services vary quite a lot depending on what stage a company's at. So for example, an early stage Irish company comes to me with nothing on the ground in the US and says, listen, Conor, I'm looking to go to the US. I don't know where to go or how to get started. We can assist with things like bespoke market research, help finding a suitable location for you to set up your business in the US, assistance with incorporating a US entity, setting up a US bank account, any sort of accountancy, tax, legal, immigration advice you may need. And then if you can imagine, if we go up to a company that has hundreds, if not thousands of people in the US, we've got a completely different suite of services that we can offer to them. So that's one side of what I do. The other side of what I do is, if you can imagine, I sit at the federal level in the United States. And what that means is that I look after all 50 US states. So if I'm having a conversation with you and you ultimately decide that you want to set up in New York, California, Illinois, Florida, whatever state it may be, it doesn't really matter to me because it all counts as US jobs created. Now there's a tier below me where every single state has an inward investment agency. It falls under the governor's office of that state. So really well resourced, really well funded, over the really unique set of incentives and supports in place to try to attract international businesses into that respective state. I do a lot of work with them to make sure their offerings are applicable to Ireland. You know, in normal times, we'd have governors from New Jersey, Idaho, whatever state it might be, flying through Ireland on business attraction missions. But also to make sure companies such as you are linked in with people locally in these states to ensure that you're maximizing the level of support that you're getting in the US. So I just wanted to expand a little bit on some of the popular items that we help in Irish companies with regards to their US aspirations. And the first thing is the bespoke market intelligence, which I just briefly mentioned on my previous slide. But just to elaborate on that in a little bit more detail. So I ultimately report back into the US Department of Commerce back in Washington, DC. And within the US Department of Commerce, there's a sole dedicated research team that works with their objective is to work with international companies such as the ones on this call, get an understanding of what's important to you, what are your drivers for going to the US, what's your route to market to the US, what the ideal location looks for you. Is it close proximity to a certain type of customer? Is it availability of talent? Is it the cost associated with that talent? Is it a direct flight in from Ireland? And we can pull together reports which will help guide you in terms of where you should be focusing your efforts in the United States and where you ultimately hopefully set up in the US. We can provide insight into investment trends. We've got a number of tools at our resources. I'm going to show one in the next slide called the cluster mapping tool, which can showcase again where there might be opportunities for your business to succeed, grow and scale in the US. We can provide the advice on the domestic market. About a year ago, we published a document called the SelectUSA Investor Guide. It's a concise, well, it's, if you can call it 87 pages concise, it's a concise, informative document which showcases all the considerations an international company should take into account when looking at investing and setting up a business in the United States. I'd strongly recommend any company looking at the US to look at this document because it is a fantastic manual for you to flick through the things that you should be talking about internally in your business as you look to the US. The strongest asset I have at my disposal, without question, is my connections. So I do not have the answer to everything, but I'm usually 1 degree of separation away from someone who does, either here in Ireland or in the United States. You can add real value to your business, whether it be service providers, other Irish companies who have been there and done that, anyone in the 50 state level organizations. It's quite hard to define what the connections and network is, because it is very, very dependent, again, on the questions that you have, that you need an answer to. We provide assistance with navigating the regulatory environment. Being a US federal agency, we have links in with the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Defense, the FDA, whatever organization might be of interest to you to talk to in the United States that's relevant to your business. We should be able to plug you in with someone within that agency to talk about the issue at hand. The final point I wanted to make is that our aim and objective is not just to land you in the US and let you go off and do your own thing. We want to land you in the US, support you, nurture you, and see you choose the United States to be the location where you scale your business moving forward in an international context. This is just an example of the cluster mapping tool that we have, which is one of a wide variety of tools that we have at our disposal. This is for the medical device cluster in the United States. You'll see the areas in dark blue are areas with high specialization. The areas in that tealy color are places that are kind of emerging. So we can do this for pretty much any industry sector, and we can talk you through what the results mean. Well, I say we, the guys at the research team back in Washington, DC can talk you through the logic behind their reports. So this all sounds great, but what does it mean in practice? I just wanted to highlight some recent case studies to showcase how we've been working with Irish companies looking at the US. So the first one I want to highlight is an Irish e-commerce company came to us about 9-12 months ago, looking to make their first international expansion. The US was on the list alongside the UK and the European market. Maybe a lot of companies can relate with that. They were a little bit tentative looking at the United States because they felt that it was quite a complex market and maybe not as easy as the UK to do business with. So we did a lot of work with them, had conversations with them to kind of remove that layer of complexity and showcase that the US is actually a very easy place to do business and the rewards far outweigh the risks. So as we were having these conversations, we said, listen, we'll do a little bit of research for you, and we started showcasing where there might be pockets for them in terms of opportunities in the US, started linking them in with state and local economic development organizations, the inward investment agencies, that is, where they can have conversations about, you know, if we choose to locate in Massachusetts or Texas, you know, what's the benefits? What can you guys do for us? And as that was going along, they suddenly realized, hold on, the US actually is where we wanted to focus on. So we then kind of had a parallel stream alongside it where we were helping them incorporate the business, setting up a bank account, any sort of practical advice they may need. And delighted to say that about a month ago, they decided to open up in Austin, Texas, where they're looking to hire 12 people in the first year. Second case study I wanted to touch on is an existing company who's already been in the US, an historical client of us, a company who has about 150 people dotted across 4 US states. They came to us about a year ago. Like many other companies, they'd seen a dramatic decrease in their order book by about 80-90%. So we worked with them to make sure that they ascertained support from the US federal stimulus package that was introduced by the previous administration. And they gained access to this thing called the Paycheck Protection Program, which is an initiative by the Small Business Administration, where they got support that safeguarded those 150 jobs. Now we're coming out the other side of it, where the US is back absolutely booming again on the business side of things, and they're looking to add jobs in the US market, which is fantastic to see. The final one is, how do we support large scale investment in the United States? So we do a lot of work with an Irish company who has about 8,000 people in the United States, made really significant investments over the course of the last year in Mississippi, North Carolina, and Ohio. So someone at that level, we linked them in with maybe the US ambassador here in Ireland to have conversations, someone senior like the US Secretary of Commerce back in DC, governors of the states they're operating in, just to make sure all their needs are being met. And we can relate. The reason they like using us is because we can be one source for them to reach out to in order to facilitate those connections. So I just wanted to quickly as well just touch on some investment trends that we're seeing that might be relevant and can relate to some companies on this call. The first one that I wanted to just mention is that we're seeing more and more Irish companies, and Orna touched on it, becoming much more cognizant of the challenges of serving the US market remotely through an export model. And as a result of that, we're seeing more and more Irish companies actually choosing to invest, locate, and hire people in the US. Like this is a trend that's backed up by the figures. In early 2017, there was about 450 Irish companies in the US. This year at the moment, there's close to 700. And I think if you ask any of those Irish companies what one of the critical factors of their success has been, it's actually hiring people on the ground in the US. I think as well that, you know, the fact there's a travel ban in situ at the moment really showcases the importance of having a US presence. So as you're trying to serve US clients without actually be getting over into the market, it's incredibly problematic. And also, as Orna touched on, is in the US institutions and organizations like to do business with companies who have a US presence. So we're seeing more and more Irish companies going there. We're also seeing a much greater diversification in terms of where these companies are actually choosing to locate. So a big part of my job is trying to help educate Irish companies that life exists across all 50 US states. That's one of the big benefits of working with us and working with the research team, is that we can showcase locations that maybe you wouldn't have considered initially, but are actually the perfect fit for your business. Places like, you know, just for example, Tennessee or Utah, places that aren't synonymous with Irish investment. And we're seeing more and more and more Irish companies actually locating in states that aren't necessarily historically synonymous with Irish investment. And the next thing I wanted to mention is just a really common market entry strategy that we see. And I think we're very fortunate in Ireland to have the ability for companies to do this. And that is, we're seeing Irish companies working with US multinationals on the ground here in Ireland, and then leveraging these relationships in order to enter into the United States. So for example, say an engineering services firm works with Intel on a data center here in Ireland. They do such a fantastic job that Intel actually says to them, hold on, we've got 3 data centers in the United States under construction. We'd love you to come over and work on them for us. So fantastic market entry strategy. And one, if the companies on this call are working with US multinationals here in Ireland, might be worth exploring in a little bit more detail. The final piece I wanted to just mention is that we're seeing more and more Irish companies actually choosing to locate in the United States, which I've already mentioned this previously, and exporting into other international markets. And we'd be delighted to talk you through how we might be able to support that if that's something of interest. Going to skip off this because I was going to mention how we support the states coming into Ireland. I've kind of touched on as well. It's probably not too relevant for people on this call. The final thing I wanted to talk about is the SelectUSA Investment Summit. So the first question, as I put that up, everyone on the call is probably going, what is the SelectUSA Investment Summit? So the SelectUSA Investment Summit is the flagship event every year in the United States that's geared towards both promoting and supporting foreign direct investment into the US. So ourselves here in Ireland, along with about 80 other international markets, we bring embassy-led, usually ambassadorial-led delegations of companies to Washington, DC for a week-long program that the ultimate objective of the summit is trying to make it as easy as possible for international companies to invest and succeed in the United States. So throughout the course of the week-long program, you know, there's a number of, all 50 US states are there under one roof. It's the only event of the year where all 50 US states are there. There's a huge amalgamation of international companies who are going through a similar journey for you to network on. About 1,500 different international companies are there. A number of service providers. Basically, anyone who is there should be able to help you and assist you with regards to your US ambitions and aspirations. Why should you attend the summit? Well, on top of the reason I just mentioned, which is pretty important, it's an excellent chance. So throughout the course of the 5 days, there's a number of talks, roundtables, workshops covering off every aspect of doing in the business in the United States, from very basic things like how do I actually set up a US entity? How do I set up a US bank account? What immigration considerations should I take into account? To industry-specific talks on, you know, maybe the healthcare sector and future trends that we're seeing in the US and challenges and opportunities in healthcare in the United States. Alongside that, as I previously mentioned, it's the one event of the year that convenes all 50 US states under one roof. So if you're interested in talking to 5, 10, 15 different US states, it's an excellent chance to engage with them and blitz them in a week-long period. This year as well, there's a big focus on supporting early stage international SMEs in the tech space with regards to investing in the United States. So any company that's under 8 years old, under 10 million in revenue, $10 million in revenue, under 40 employees worldwide, they qualify for a special discounted rate of $350 for the SelectUSA Summit. And they have a whole specific program focused on those SMEs as well. When will it take place? So that's the thing. It takes place on Monday week, June 7th to 11th. This is the first ever time it's being done virtually. I know that that is a very tight timeline maybe for people to plan and initiate, but if this one is too tight in the virtual capacity, absolutely love to talk to you about our plans for the 2022 SelectUSA Summit, which we hope will be back in person in Washington, DC. And how do you register? Just please reach out to me. My email address is conor.kenny@trade.gov, or else Danielle and the team, feel free to reach out to them and they can share it with you. So that's everything for me. So I'll hand back to you, Sabine, and just once again, thank you so much for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you very much, Conor, for your insightful presentation. Thank you. And we do have a few questions, both for you, Conor, and Orna. So maybe I'll address the first questions to Orna. Orna, why did you choose the US over markets closer to home, such as the UK, for example?
Thanks, Sabine. Yeah, it's an interesting question, all right, and one that we get asked quite regularly. But I think ultimately there's two main reasons for this. The first one being how they buy here in Ireland and in the UK versus how they buy in the US, and procurement and tender rules are quite onerous on a new startup company here locally. I mean, obviously there's a lot of legal requirements around that, and you know, you've got to just deal with them. But it can be slow. It can create a lot of it can take a lot of focus away from the promoters of the company when it comes to that sort of planning and investment of time. Whereas in the US, certainly for our clients, we were dealing with private, large health systems who have complete autonomy to buy your software if they so choose. I think also as well, which sort of feeds back into that initial market research and market segmentation, we will always commit to Ireland no matter what, whether as challenging as it is, and in fact it's probably the most challenging market we find, but that's just unique to the Irish culture really in hospitals and technology and adoption. But I think when looking at the UK, they have a massively evolved ecosystem when it comes to software and technology over there. So it's hugely competitive, and really we felt that our time and efforts and investment was better spent in the US, where there's far more scope to scale the business, and the competitive analysis in the UK just didn't lend itself to us spending as much time. Although we are still somewhat working in that market and trying to expand it, it will be a slower burner. So I think essentially that was really what it all boils down to.
That's great. Thank you very much, Orna. And over to Conor, we have a question from Sheila Flannery. When is the right time to make contact? What is the earliest stage, that a startup really should approach you?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So if you're looking at the US market, ideally what the natural progression that happens, and we work very closely with the likes of Enterprise Ireland. So naturally what would happen is that an Irish company would look at the US and look to sell into the US first, just to make sure their product or service is accepted in the market. And by working with Enterprise Ireland, they've got a huge range and fantastic support that should be able to help a company do that and access into the US. Then once a critical mass is hit, say it's $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, a company then will realize that, hold on a second, we need to put boots on the ground. And that's kind of where we step in. And we work very closely, as I said, with Enterprise Ireland, but we can help with the actual formation of the company and setting up in the US market. So I would recommend that a company firstly sells into the United States, but if you wanted to set up in the US as well, I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone in the first instance to provide a bit of advice in terms of what other Irish companies have done and what we see in terms of common trends into the US. That sounds like I'm kind of dancing around the question, but I hope that was a helpful answer.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Conor. And does it matter which state you set up a company in the US? Many companies seem to choose Delaware. Is there an advantage registering in Delaware especially? Yeah,
so I'd say 95% of the companies that I work with register and incorporate in Delaware without actually having a physical presence in Delaware. Range of advantages of doing that, and I suppose the best thing to do would be to talk to either a US or Irish based accountant about the benefits of incorporating in Delaware, and I'd be happy to put someone in touch with that. But you don't need to incorporate necessarily in the state that you're going to set up with. Delaware is kind of the capital for US incorporation, both for domestic entities and for international entities looking to enter the market.
Okay. Thank you. We have a question from Noel also. Do you need to be established in the USA to sell into the USA, especially for SMEs where the cost of establishing an LLC C Corp can be expensive?
The answer to that is no, but I think Orna might be better placed to answer that, if that's okay, Orna, because you obviously have experience in terms of exporting into the US before actually going over there.
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, just repeat the question again,
Yes.
just to be sure I answer
Sure.
correctly.
Is there a need to be established in the USA to sell into the USA? For example, for yourself, you have no settlements down there. So where's the cost? You know, it can be quite high to go over to the USA to set up there. So
Completely.
you didn't have to do that yourself.
No, so just wanted to make sure I understood what established means. You know, I think Conor touched upon this all right about getting yourself over there, and I mean there are various different ways of looking at this. I think initially, as I said, you don't need to be established. I think so long as you show commitment to be there regularly, until you get that critical mass where it justifies financially you setting up an office, hiring staff. You know, you can do those simpler things like incorporating, setting up the bank account, and obviously Conor has touched upon all of those benefits too, and that support. But certainly you don't have to have this big infrastructure or presence that you feel you might do. You know, they do understand to some extent, and certainly our clients understand that we are an Irish company, first and foremost, that we are looking to establish ourselves in that market. And generally speaking, so long as you show sufficient commitment, they, you know, particularly in healthcare, I suspect that really the attitude is, you know, we've got patients to be concerned about here. We've got, you know, high standards. We're in regulation. They want to make sure that we're going to be there in 6 to 12 months and thereafter. So it's more of a psychology, I think, that you're there when you know, you just got to get on the plane and be over there for a couple of weeks at a time. You don't have to be living there. It is too expensive in the early stage. Certainly, as I touched upon, early stage companies would want to be very careful not to, you know, look at your cash burn, see how long you can be there for. That will actually make financial sense for you. But no, I would definitely not be concerned that you're not fully established there. It is a slow growth trajectory for you, and I think you could definitely manage it by flying over and back. But just being there for a couple of weeks at a time, and make sure that you can try and fit all of your meetings as best you can into that period when you are there, if that's possible. I hope that answers.
That makes perfect sense. And no, just to let you know as well that like it's not necessarily very expensive over there. Like we work with accountancy firms that we'd be able to put you in touch with that charge maybe have a package for about $5,000 to help incorporate the business and set up bank accounts and do the back office stuff for a business over there. And then, you know, you don't have to fully commit to a location. A lot of companies going over in the first instance at an early stage would maybe take like a hot desk, a WeWork facility, something like that. And a great thing about that is you're dipping your toe in the market. So say you take one of those on the East Coast and all of a sudden you start focusing in on the United States and all your business is coming from maybe the Midwest or the West Coast, that you can easily move and gives you that flexibility to move. So I wouldn't be put off by the fact that you feel like it's going to be a very costly experience to actually set up there. And that is, I suppose, as I previously mentioned in my conversation, that like use the supports like us in Enterprise Ireland who have people who are tried and trusted with regards to supporting Irish SMEs with their US investment aspirations, who we know operate at a cost competitive model with regards to setting up an Irish business in the US.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Conor. And just to ask as well specifically, is there any cost actually for the service that you provide, Conor, from the US Embassy?
No cost at all for any of the services, even the research. It's all subsidized by the US government because it's obviously going to have economic benefit for the US. We want to see more and more international companies choose to locate in the United States. So we don't. The only thing that we charge for is the admission cost for the SelectUSA investment summit every year, which is well worth the fee as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I have a question for Orna. What would you have done differently on this journey?
Yeah, thanks, Sabine. Yeah, I think probably looking back, lots of different things could have been different. I think some of the things we did right were tapping into those supports that both Conor and the SelectUS team and the Embassy, Enterprise Ireland, I can't speak highly enough about how brilliant they are as well. And obviously the team there in Hothouse. But I think really for us personally and our journey so far, we've been bootstrapping the whole way along and continue to do that for however long it will last. But I think you can really you can really suffer. I think, you know, it's while the US market can be done affordably, it's still, when you're not revenue generating over there and you're still very early stage, you really need to watch your cash burn. And I think we probably would have been a bit more honest with ourselves about this, and I think we probably would have gone out for investment much sooner. It might sound, you know, like a simple thing to say, but and a lot of early companies, early stage companies do that, but you know, I think we probably would have progressed through the market quicker had we done that. And you want to be just careful that you know, the competition doesn't hot up on you over there and that you miss opportunities. Being the size that it is, and you know, it's, as I said, and I kind of touched upon it, you don't have to be across the whole of the US. You can pick your states, but at the same time, you want to move through the you know, and your sales pipeline as well can be, you want to get going very quickly. And sales pipeline in healthcare is anything up to 24 months now, so that's a massive burn of cash in our experience. And I think really, had we sat down and thought more about the finances, I think we probably would have had a slightly easier journey. It's been, you know, it's been testing at times, and that's the one takeaway I think I would have from that.
Okay, and at what stage is CliniShift at, and I suppose how long has it taken to get this far? If you could give us a very quick kind of timeline again. Sorry.
Sure. I mean, and for each sector, it's different. You know, I can only speak to the healthcare sector, which I think is probably the most onerous to try and break into. I suppose our journey in the US specifically began in 2017, and we immediately started to look for our first pilot site. But it's taken us 2.5 to 3 years to get that pilot up and running. And as I said, it's about 10 months underway now. So we're at the stage where we have the pilot underway, and we'll probably have 3 or 4 potential customers within this, hopefully the next month or two. Now that things are starting to ease, I think the COVID problem has really hampered companies like us, because it's the healthcare sector. Trying to sell software to frontline staff who are just completely overworked as it is was very challenging. So, you know, that has to be factored into everything. But we're definitely seeing things start to come back around now. I think there's a look at how workforce in healthcare can be better organized, better, you know, resources can be better managed, and I think that's going to have hopefully a positive spin on how we move forward in the market. So, you know, in the US, as I said, we've leaned into that market significantly now. It's 70% of our resources, and we're really getting to grips with the market now. So certainly in a much better place now than we were 2 years ago, I would say.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Orna. And it's great to hear that it is seems to pick up again for your company. And also, Conor, is there so there's no need really to set up a US affiliate company as such?
To sell into the US?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's a traditional export model. As I mentioned in my conversation, though, I think that the companies are becoming more and more aware of the challenges of trying to serve the US remotely and gain traction in the US remotely without actually having people on the ground over there. The US companies would like to see companies actually have a commitment there. It's that kind of down the road mentality. I suppose it's the same for the Irish companies, that, you know, if you're doing business with someone and they're based in the US with no office in Ireland, does that make you a little bit tentative to maybe get involved with them? So there is no need, because that's the traditional export model. But I would say that the likelihood of you succeeding and being successful, like if you ask any successful Irish companies with regards to what they've done in the United States, the vast majority of them will say that, like, the number one thing is actually putting boots on the ground and making a commitment to the market. It makes a huge difference.
Okay, and would you have an idea of the percentage of firms setting up in the US for business to business and the one for business to customer? Is there any?
I do not. We deal with both. We deal with a plethora of companies operating in both spheres. One thing that I will say is that if you're looking for advice, if it's business to business, if it's business to consumer, if it's someone that's operating in the same sector as you, one of the big advantages, so I work with counterparts all around the world, whether it's Brazil, Japan, Mexico, Germany, Israel, wherever it may be. And one of the big advantages to Ireland is the Irish companies' willingness to actually share their experiences in the US with one another. So a lot of what we do is we bring together roundtables, discussions. The summit's fantastic for this, where maybe, you know, engineering services firms who are incredibly competitive in the Irish market would never talk to each other. We'd bring them around the table to discuss what's going on in the US. All of a sudden, they're sharing best practices, knowledge, experiences in the market because they realize that the US, there's enough in it for all of them. And if they approach it as Team Ireland, it actually benefits each other. So, for example, if you're looking for advice from that, you know, it's great talking to me and Enterprise Ireland. You want to be talking to people like Orna and other Irish companies who have been there and done it, had challenges, found other things to work. And that's a big part of what we do, is linking them in with it, whether it be business to business or business to consumer. We can definitely help with that.
Okay, that's great, Conor. And a final question, when is the right time to make contact? When am I ready to launch, or maybe sooner?
So again, it's kind of depending on what the company's desires. Ideally, you know, we'd want to be doing a little bit of research in the background, maybe 9 to 12 months before you're actually ready to hit the ground in the United States. And the reason I say that is because we can do research, we can start showcasing where relevant locations might be, we can start putting you in touch with people from those states and at a local level within those states. So you get a good understanding of what kind of supports might be available, and then you should, after the conversations with them, realize where you want to actually set up your US business. Also, what I will say is, while that's going on in the background, we can do things like incorporate the US business. Sometimes opening up a bank account in the United States, you can hit a little bit of a hurdle. That's a bit of a time delay there. So if you know it's going to be taking place and this is something you're going to be doing, I'd recommend getting the ball rolling on that as soon as possible. So it's kind of depending on when a company wants to come to us. Usually what we'd see in terms of a lead time from an organization talking to us and actually choosing to invest in the United States is probably, it's actually gotten a lot quicker lately. It was probably between about 6 to 12 months.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you both for answering those questions. Thank you again for your excellent presentations and all the feedback you've shared with us today. And thank you for everybody else who's attended this webinar. The webinar will be available later on this week on our usual channels and on our website. Our next Learn and Lunch webinar will be on the 30th of June. And again, we'll provide more details closer to the date. Thank you again to Orna and Conor, and thank you all, and good afternoon to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.